Welcome viewers to the Early Childhood Development Talk Show. My name is Jessica Brown and I'll be moderating this discussion on child safety and responsive care. Thank you for joining us. Children need safe environments to grow and thrive. It is important to understand that children are very likely to imitate the behaviors and pick up the habits of adults around them. Exposing children to violence actively hinders their brain development, so it is vital to protect children from harmful practices and environments, including drug and alcohol abuse. In addition, children need to be protected from hazards such as unsafe play areas, exposure to open defecation, busy roads, open wells, and all sorts of violence. Responsive caregiving is when parents and caregivers meet a child's need by paying attention to the child's signals such as body language, emotions, and other forms of expression. This involves playing and communicating with the child, adopting responsive feeding practices, providing nurturing care and affection, adopting positive discipline practices, and encouraging fathers to be present and to respond to the child's needs. For children to grow up happy, healthy, and educated, they need to be in an environment that is clean, free from violence, they need love and affection, and they need to be exposed to positive behaviors and habits that they can then adopt. During this conversation, we will be discussing safety and responsive caregiving so as to learn about how best we can heed our child's emotional and psychosocial needs in order to guarantee the holistic and healthy development of the child. Before I introduce you to our guest, I'd like to provide you with a brief understanding of the Right Start campaign. The Ministry of Gender Equality, Poverty Eradication and Social Welfare, the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, and the Ministry of Health and Social Services have instituted the Right Start National Integrated Early Childhood Development Campaign. This national campaign seeks to raise awareness and reinforce the importance of the early years of a child's life. Under the slogan, "Make a child's first steps the right steps," the campaign seeks to promote behavior change towards the optimal development of children, improve integrated ECD policy implementation and service delivery, increase national funding for ECD, and improve the frequency and quality of conversations about how critical these early years are, as informed by neuroscience. This campaign is supported by the European Union, Interteam Switzerland, and UNICEF Namibia. Have a look at this informative video, and when we come back, we'll say hello to our guests.
Children develop brain connections through their everyday experiences. They're built through positive interactions with their parents and caregivers, as well as by using their senses to interact with the world. Children who are exposed to violence are more likely to suffer severe effects, which include stunted brain development, reduced capacity for learning, behavioral problems, and difficulty making friends and forging healthy relationships. These effects have lifelong impacts. This includes direct violence against children, as well as violence in the home, schools, and communities. Babies and young children grow, learn, and develop optimally when they receive love and affection, attention, encouragement, and mental stimulation. Keep a child's life and home free from violence to give a child the best start in life. Visit www.rightstart.com.na to learn more about how you can make a child's first steps the right steps.
Joining me today for this very important discussion about early childhood development and the Right Start campaign is Ms. Ayesha Wentworth, Deputy Director at the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also present is Ms. Foibe Silvanus, a founder of an ECD Center and a principal. Welcome, Ms. Foibe.
Thank you.
And lastly, Mr. Markus Angula, a child protection expert from UNICEF. Welcome, Markus.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So Ayesha, we'll start with you. Child protection means that safeguarding children from harm, which includes different types of violence, abuse, exploitation, and neglect. Can you explain to us a bit more about what these different terms mean?
Safeguarding as a term means the protection of the health and well-being and the human rights of our children. And this is so important and so fundamental because they are so fragile and vulnerable, and we as adults have to be the ones to protect them and to really take care of them. You know, there are lots of different types of abuse, and I like the notion that abuse is not only the action but also inaction. Yes. If you are not taking action to protect the children, then you are also part of an abusive cycle.
Could you maybe expand a bit on some of the different types of abuse that we see? Mm-hmm. So we know about emotional, physical, sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. Can you maybe give some definitions about what these different terminologies relate to?
Okay, Jessica, well, we have emotional abuse where we're looking at issues like verbal abuse, we're looking at psychological abuse, and then we have physical abuse, which is, the physical hitting, hurting of the child, and the sexual abuse, which can be various types of, phases of sexual abuse. It can be actual intercourse, but it can also just be inappropriate touching. It can be online also, so it's not even physical sexual abuse, but exposure to pornography, making the child a part of child pornography. So, abuse really, really varies in its different categories as well.
Thank you, and I think we'll speak about this more as we go through the program. But I think it's also really important just to emphasize that different types of abuse do not mean different types of trauma necessarily. Children who have been emotionally abused, we might think they haven't been physically harmed, but it can lead to the same long-term trauma as somebody who has been exposed to physical violence or sexual violence. Yes, Markus, you wanted
absolutely.
to add?
And that is particularly true, especially when you look at online violence, where it's happening through digital technology, where you have a perpetrator sitting in another location and a child in a different location, where one might think that what is the impact of this abuse? What trauma could a child possibly go through when they are not physically being abused or when the perpetrator is not physically present? And that is one thing that we need to understand and be able to safeguard our children from that.
Absolutely. And I think what's also important to emphasize is that sometimes when parents are trying to discipline their children, those practices actually reach to the point that they're abusive and very harmful. So Foibe, I wanted to ask you, in terms of responsive caregiving, we're encouraging parents and caregivers to refrain from corporal punishment in the event that the child is misbehaving and adopt alternative forms of discipline instead. So if you could maybe tell us a bit about why corporal punishment is so bad and what are some examples of positive discipline that parents can use instead?
Thank you so much, Jessica. With the issue of corporal punishment is that corporal punishment is very bad in a sense that it actually leads to the child to have psychological effect. It also leads to the children also not having good relationship with their parents. And it also leads to the child also to think about, to become aggressive because they are also questioning whether do my parents really love me. And we have also seen that some children were really seriously injured when it's come to corporal punishment. And also this corporal punishment also have led to children, some children were beaten to death. And what we encourage parents to do is that is to refrain from physical harm to the child. So some of the positive alternative measure that parents can actually explore is to explain the problem to the children. When children are misbehaving, the parents need to explain why such behavior are not good. And then other alternative measure that parents can use is to take out the privilege. Children have soapy or movie that they like to watch on television. So parents can also explain to the children that because your behavior were not so good, so you are not going to watch this movie today, or you are not going to be allowed to play with your friends outside. And another alternative that parents can also use is to make sure that children take responsibility for their action. So if the child breaks something in the house, make sure that they fix it. Explain to the child because your behavior was not good, so you have to actually fix this. So those are some of the measures that parents can actually use other than just physical abusing the children.
Thank you. And I think this is a very strong point about taking the time to explain to children. When we're just using violence and the child is getting hit or beaten, there's no process of the child learning to understand what have I done wrong, what can I do differently in the future. And also we know in Namibia we have a real culture of violence. We can't open the newspaper without seeing very violent stories. And by parents showing their children that use of violence is acceptable, then we see it in the playgrounds. We see it later in life as children grow up and they become abusive within relationships or within arguments with friends. Markus, I think you wanted to add.
What I wanted to add is that with corporal punishment, it also takes away the communications structure that you have with your children. That if you keep punishing them physically, chances are that they're never going to come to you and speak to you about anything that they are facing in life, that they could be abused elsewhere or something else could be happening to them, but they will not be willing to have that open conversation with you because they'll always feel that you will blame them, you will beat them, and that you are not there to support them. And as parents, that's not the kind of message that we want to give to our children. We want to create that safe environment for our children to come and speak to us about anything and about all the experiences that they are going through.
We are talking about early childhood development, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, and now we will continue with asking some questions around ECD and the Right Start campaign. And I actually wanted to just add a question based on that, but maybe Ayesha, I think you wanted to.
Jessica, I just wanted to echo what you were saying, is that when we're using violence, we are also teaching our children that that is how you solve problems. You are not teaching them constructive ways to communicate. When I have an issue with you or a problem with you at school, instead of communicating, I hit you, I bite you, I scratch you. So I think we really need to think about what we're teaching them in terms of life skills.
Absolutely. And coping skills.
And coping skills. You know, violence is not the way to cope with a problem.
And I want to ask you, just if we stay on this topic for a little bit longer, a lot of people in Namibia will say, I was beaten as a child and I'm fine. Or this is part of my culture and my upbringing, so why wouldn't I do it to my children? So can I just ask you what your response would be to that?
When it's come to culture, when we do this workshop, we realize that most of the parents were not really raised up by their own biological parents. So the way we were brought up also shaped us how we also parent our children also. Because we tend to know that beating is the only way that you make the child to listen to you.
Yes.
But that's really actually just taking out the child not to communicate to you. And also not knowing that today they are children, but these are someone's wife or someone's husband in future. So basically what is happening is that children will tend to know that violence, that's the only way that they can resolve issue in the society. And parents, we also need to know that the way we are raising children, today they are children, but tomorrow these are someone's husband or someone's wife, and we don't want to have a society as such.
From my end, I've also heard that phrase quite a number of times, and my response to that is always that these are harmful norms that we need to move away from, and how you deal with abuse really depends on how resilient a person is. And perhaps people who make these statements were quite resilient to this abuse, but what about a child who is not resilient? A child who, after the abuse, starts feeling worthless. After being beaten, they start feeling that they are worthless and that they are nothing and they don't belong there. So it's really something that we need to do away with. And just because it has happened to somebody growing up and nothing has happened to them, it doesn't make it right. And it also doesn't mean that it should keep going on, because then we keep continuing with these norms.
With the harmful patterns.
Yes, with the harmful practices, yes.
Thank you. And Ayesha?
Jessica, my response to that always is that you're not okay. It didn't not affect you. Look at our society. Look at the violence in our society. So they cannot say that they turned out fine. Because we didn't. We didn't.
As a nation, we are really
our
struggling
society
with
didn't
violence.
turn out fine because of those practices.
And I also think what's something that's really important to stress is that some of the social ills that we see later in life that really concern the parents of our country are a direct result of the lack of nurturing care in young childhood and a direct result of the high levels of violence in childhood. And this is things like high levels of gender-based violence in relationship, but also things like teen pregnancy. Our teens are sometimes seeking solace in each other in a sexual relationship because there's maybe not nurturing in the home. So I think that link is also something that it's important for parents to acknowledge. And speaking about the home, Markus, we hear often about stranger danger when we're talking about child protection issues. But the reality is that most abuse that happens to children happens at the hands of adults that they know very well. So could you expand a bit on that?
Stranger danger refers to the idea that violence is perpetrated by strangers and that it's usually strangers who pose a threat to children. But the reality is that abuse is happening right under our nose, and it's perpetrated by people that we know, people that are known to the child, and people who have access to children who use this position of trust that they have gained from the child in order to perpetrate the abuse. And evidence have showed us that perpetrators target institutions where children are, or they first gain the trust of the parents for them to get access to the children in order to perpetrate the abuse, in making sure that the abuse is disguised and it's not detected, and that when the child is abused, it's very difficult for the child to speak out, because the child then always think about, what will people think of me if I accuse one of the most respected teacher at school of abusing me? Will the society believe that I was really abused? And I might be blamed, that society might think that I caused it upon myself. So it's not always, in most cases, it's not always the strangers, but usually people that we know, and that's how children don't really speak out.
And I think it's also important to add that very often abuse is taking place in the home, within the family. And that makes it even harder for children to speak out, to talk about an uncle or a partner of a parent or another family member, because that might also mean loss of income into the household, or the feeling of shame and guilt around the child if that person is then taken away or incarcerated.
Absolutely.
And I think also what I wanted to raise is that when people are trying to abuse children, or when people often are looking for opportunities where there's a vulnerable child. So Ayesha, I wanted to ask you, what can parents do to promote a nurturing environment in their home, but also to safeguard their children against abuse?
Jessica, I think ultimately one of the big things is creating a safe space for communication. Because if your children trust you, and if they know they can come to you with whatever problem they have, that is already half the battle won. But another big element of that is education. Children need to be educated, and parents need to be educated. What we found as a ministry is often children aren't aware that they're being abused.
Yes.
Particularly the less physical abuses, the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, the psychological abuse. They don't know what that is. So how do you report something that you don't understand? They don't know they're being groomed. They don't know that that is the process that they're going through. But if we educate them, the children first and foremost, about what the dangers are out there, that would be, a good start. But then we also have to educate our parents. They have to be able to see the signs and the symptoms. They have to be able to pick up on the nuances that today Tony is just quiet and withdrawn, but he's usually this vivacious and very, very happy child. So it really is an issue about education, but also creating that culture of care within our schools and within our communities, but within the home as well. I think those are fundamental. If you don't know it, you cannot report it.
So I think two key things from that is, one, I think it's very important that within our families we start having some of these more difficult conversations. We know it can be taboo, can be uncomfortable to talk about abuse, to talk about sexual abuse, to talk about online protection, but it's really important as families that we start trying to communicate better. And I think the second thing that Ayesha you touched on is that we as a community, we need to go back to this "it takes a village to raise a child" mindset, because I think we all are probably aware of some children who are vulnerable, but we don't necessarily take the steps to report our concerns or to follow up with that child. And I think that's really important. So Foibe, in Namibia, we know that there's a lot of emphasis on the importance of authority and respect in our child-parent relationships. And often that this kind of authority and respect is based on a fear for the elder. So why do you think it's so important for parents to have a more emotional relationship with their children?
So it's very important that parents really have a good communication with their children, because if a parent is having a good relationship with the child, so the children get to open up whenever they have fear of anything, to also express their feelings also. Because most of the time children have issues in their life, but because they don't have good relationship with their parents, they don't really come and open up to their parents and discuss issues that are bothering them. And they tend to seek for alternative or answers outside rather than parents having discussion with their children.
Yes.
So parents really need to show love and care for their children. And in that way, children would actually grow up in a loving environment that they feel like they are being loved by their parents. They are being listened to, because sometimes children tend to know that, no, I'm trying to communicate to my parents, but my parent is pretending that they can't hear what I'm trying to communicate to them. So in that way, children, when they are out there, they will also be able to have this coping mechanism also, and interpersonal skill also.
Yes.
When they are in ECD center, they will also able to share their love with one another, because that is what the parents are also showing them at home.
Thank you. Markus, did you want to add?
Just to also emphasize that with regards to respect, as parents, we need to set the boundaries. To what extent does respect go? Because we need to emphasize that children have to respect their elders, but also need to draw the distinction that certain things are wrong. Because if that is not clear to the child, children might being abused under respect, under the uncle who's coming to say that, you know, respect me, and from there they abuse the child, and the child will not speak out, because all along they've been taught that, you know, you have to listen to an adult, you have to listen when your uncle tells you so. It's striking the balance between instilling respect in the child, but also making sure that the child is able to say no when that respect is being abused by the adult.
And I think what links quite nicely to this is this idea around the relationships that our children have with the men in their lives, and the positive relationships that they have with fathers. So we know that from research that children with present fathers in their lives grow up to be more confident, more emotionally mature. They tend to have better success in life. How far do you agree with this statement, and what more do you think can be done?
I absolutely agree with that statement. And the presence of a father in a child's life can never be overemphasized, because children need to grow up with a father figure who's involved in their life, somebody that they can look up to for guidance, for inspiration, and somebody to show them love and care, because love from one parent is not sufficient. And if a child can at least benefit from love and nurturing from both parents, then really they grow up then understanding and being inspired by that. And what we are also seeing is that there's a lot of violence that is being perpetrated by men on children. So a lot of children also really grow up fearing men, and they grow up only seeing the bad side of their fathers, or men in general, basically. So these are some of the things that if we can have children growing up with their fathers who are involved, then it's really setting the tone for them that they too can become motivated, and they can become productive with their life at a later stage. So I fully agree.
Thank you. Did you want to add something, Ayesha?
No, I think Markus has said it very well, but you know, I think it's also about the relationships. It's about the type of relationships that you will have as an adult, that which is mirrored to you as a child.
Absolutely.
And you know, parents don't always have to be together, but there can still be positive relationships. Your father can still be involved in your life, even though the parents are not married or whatever the case may be. And if there is a good relationship between these parents, then the child will mirror that when they grow up. And I think that's very, very important.
And I think what's really important to also emphasize is that the father involvement, we don't mean you're just paying your maintenance. Throwing money at a problem doesn't solve the problem. It's really about spending quality time with that child. And like you said, even if you're not with the mother, spending time with that child from a baby, being involved with the feeding, with the changing, playing with the child, talking to the child, reading stories with the child, all of this is what builds that strong bond. And Ayesha, as a clinical psychologist, what do you see as being some of the biggest psychological challenges that young people are dealing with now? And how important a role does positive parenting and nurturing play in addressing these challenges?
Jessica, that is a very big question. Because I think that children face various or different psychological challenges at different phases of their lives, depending on their development and where they are in the stage of the development. So, you know, for our teenagers, it's more the identity crisis and you know, trying to figure out who I am in this whole society. For the little ones, it's getting agency. It's you know, understanding independence. So you know, that psychosocial development will also show you the picture of what the problems are. But just in terms of our society, if we look at it, I think The issue is parental involvement. Really, we see it in our schools. Our parents are not coming. They're not supporting the kids in school. And again, it goes to what Miss Foibe said, that the children then feel unloved, uncared for. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges across the board, psychologically, that our children face, is this sense of belonging. And that is where positive parenting or involved parenting is so important, because it's through our parents, our primary role models, that we learn life skills. We learn coping strategies, we learn how to solve problems, we learn how to relate to other people. So if parents can lay that good foundation, then the challenges that the children face, whatever they may be, abuse, substances, bullying, then they are able to cope with them better. So that foundation of that interactive, enabling environment is what helps them cope with the challenges that they'll meet along their journey in development.
Absolutely. And I think one thing that I would like to add that builds on that is that when children are in a nurturing environment, it really stimulates brain development. But so when eye contact with young children helps to stimulate brain development, nurturing touch, speaking to children, singing with children, it all is stimulating this brain development of a child. And the other side of the coin is that being exposed to violence actively hinders a child's brain development. The child is so busy responding to the threat of violence that their body is in a constant fight, flight, or freeze mode, and their energy is not going into building these little brains. Their energy is going into protective. So you can actually see from brain scans of children those who have been nurtured versus those who have been neglected or have been exposed to violence. And the difference in brain development is really startling. Markus, did you want to add?
Yes, and from the protection side, what we've seen is that a lot of children are missing out on childhood when their parents are not present, because then they themselves are forced to become adults. They are forced to take up these adult roles where if their parents are not, if they are not present, then it really becomes an issue with them that, I have to become an adult, I have to provide for my younger siblings. And in that process, they really just miss out on being a child. And it's a pity.
It's such a shame.
Yeah.
So Foibe, I want to speak now a little bit about environmental safety, so the environment that our children are growing up in, the physical environment. So we obviously want to see our children learning and playing in clean areas, free from open defecation, but we know that this isn't always a reality for vulnerable children, especially in informal settlements and so on. So what would you say is the best entry point for coordination efforts to address this problem, especially in low-income settings, which I know you've been very involved with?
Safe environment is really a serious problem or a serious concern, especially in the informal settlement. So we have seen that there is lack of play area, so there is no playground in the informal settlement. So what happens is that children tend to play in riverbed. They play with harmful objects, they play with harmful things that can even affect them. And then this can also lead to disease like diarrhea. But it takes a village to raise a child. That parents and community, we need to come together. It does not necessary that children cannot have a safe environment to play if there is no playground. But parents can have collective effort to make sure that even if a child is at home, so they can also learn at home where it's safe, whereby parents can teach children about old stories. They can teach them with any resources that they can find at home. And also, when it's come to the issues of sanitation, is also a serious concern in the informal settlement, whereby service provider, community leader, they need to come together and educate people that community member, they need to make sure that they build their own toilet, because it's not safe for the children that they use riverbed to help them when nature comes. But people can put resources together, neighbors, so that at least they can have a toilet, because we see that also abuse also happen to children when they go to far riverbed also. And at night is also not safe for children also. But if the community can come together, ensure that they educate one another in terms of hygiene, and why is it so important to live in a cleaner environment? take up their own initiative, because your waste is your responsibility. It doesn't mean that when you live in the informal settlement you need to live in a dirty environment, but people can really come together and make an effort to make sure that the children are having a safer environment.
And I think especially now with some of the outbreaks we've been seeing, we had a hepatitis E outbreak, and now we also know that COVID-19 can be transmitted through fecal-oral transmission. So I understand you've also been very involved with installing tippy-taps across the informal settlements.
Yes.
And at ECD centers.
Yes, yeah. So those are some of the corrective measures that we have been doing in the informal settlement, just to educate people about health, and also to educate the people about the importance of hand wash, and also the importance of having a toilet at home, that you have your own privacy at home. You don't run around in the bush and see whether who is coming and not, so you can help yourself. But at least we also seen that the environment are clean now, that children are no longer roaming around in the street and they pick up unnecessary things.
Thank you very much. We've been talking about early childhood development, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Our discussion today has been about early childhood development and the National Right Start campaign. So again, speaking about COVID-19, we've had a period of lockdown. We've had periods of people learning from home, working from home, being online more. And Markus, I would like to ask you, you've done a lot of work around child online protection.
Yes.
So as we are increasingly living in online lives, and we want our children to be able to benefit from all the positive things of a digital life, and we want them to be really using technology from a young age. We know they are. Children tend to be better with their smartphones than we are. But this has positive opportunities, but it also has some threats. So would you be able to talk a bit about what parents can do to safeguard their children from dangers online while still reaping all the benefits of having a digital life?
Digital technology has indeed transformed the lives of children across the globe. And as you rightly indicated, it has offered a lot of opportunities for children, for them to learn, for them to grow, and even connect with friends from everywhere. But there are a lot of risks that are associated with digital platforms that I believe that, first of all, parents need to be aware of this risk. Like Ayesha indicated, you cannot safeguard something if you are not aware. So as a parent, you will not be able to pick up the red flags if you are not aware of the risks that are associated with online platforms. And some of the risks are, for instance, cyberbullying, where you have children that are bullied by their peers or being bullied by adults online. You also have grooming by sexual predators online, where you would find adults who are pretending to be children and then build a trusting relationship with a child for purposes of sexual exploitation. So those are just some of the many risks that comes with digital platforms. And what parents need to do is to really keep a close eye on their children, firstly by being involved in the digital lives of their children, that they need to be aware of what are their children doing online, what do they enjoy the most, what are some of the apps that they enjoy using, and how is their experience online, to really start that conversation that if a child is abused online, they should at least feel comfortable to go and speak to their parents about it. And most of the time, this abuse happens virtually, and there is no evidence. It's not like physical violence where maybe a child will come home with a wound and then you would pick up the abuse, but this is something that happens online, and maybe the messages of cyberbullying were deleted. So you need to assure your child that you're not going to blame them for whatever happened. You need to reassure them that you will be there to listen and that you will believe what they are going to tell you and really not blame them about the abuse. But also there are a few things that parents should keep a lookout for. For instance, if your children are showing signs of distress, where you see that the child is withdrawn, or where you see that they are spending too much time on their digital technologies, or where, for instance, you pick up behaviors of them using their phones in the middle of the night in a bedroom, because then there are chances that they could be groomed into taking sexual pictures of themselves, or they are groomed into performing in front of a live camera. So these are some of those red flags that parents should look out for, so that they are able to proactively respond to some of these threats.
Thank you. And Ayesha, if I can ask you specifically about younger children, sort of ECD age children from 0 to 8. What should parents be doing to start talking to those children about technology and online lives? And also, what should parents be doing in terms of their own behaviors to ensure that children are protected from online threats?
Well, Jessica, I think Markus covered some of those elements, but it is really about having an open conversation with your child that is age appropriate. I think that's very important. You cannot speak to a child in a language they don't understand. And also to just make sure that they understand that you're interested in their life, both offline and online, that you're interested in what they're doing. And really from a young age, I think it's digital platforms is something that came quite quickly into our lives. And even if we look at our curriculum, it's something that comes a bit later, but we know the little ones. As you said earlier, they are better at it than us. So I think also let them educate us, let them show you what they can do, what they're capable of, and take some pride in the good achievements and show them the right way. Children need structure and guidance. We can, especially the little ones. You cannot just leave them. You need to be checking what they're doing, not in a authoritarian sort of way, but in a supportive way to make sure that they are learning digital etiquette from a young age.
And I think with any activity that a young child is doing, you set the parameters of that activity. If you're painting on the piece of paper, not on the wall. If you're playing that you're cooking, you're playing it within a confined space with things that are not toxic and so on. So I think the same applies for the digital world. If your children are using technology, you still set the parameters, how long you can use it for, which ones you can use. Often there's good options for parents' control.
And also
I just wanted to say, I think we see it a lot, the second part of your question, but we're all always sitting on our phones. When we were arriving here this morning, we were each one checking our emails, and I think our children see that. And that is what we need to model to them, especially the little ones. When you come home, put the phone away, spend quality one-on-one time. You also see mother and daughter sitting together, each one on their device. And there needs to be more just normal offline interaction in families to ensure that our children don't become too reliant on technology.
Did you want to add something before that?
I've seen it in most of the house whereby parents come from work. The first thing that the child will ask, "Mommy, Daddy, can I please have your phone?" And already they start already with the game and everything. And also sometimes with the age of 0 to 8. So when they are not behaving or they are maybe throwing tantrums, so what the parents tend to do is that here is a phone. So do whatever that you want to do with the phone. And also some of the game that they are also playing. So children are smart like smartphone. They can even undiscover things that we didn't even know as a parent. And they are the one that are also teaching us how to use our phones also sometimes. Sometimes they can go to an extreme level that they are discovering things that can be also harmful to them. So we just need to make sure that parents, we watch out what our children are doing with our phone. And like my colleague said, that it's very important that we spend time with our children. Children don't need to spend time with the phone, but they need that love from their parents.
Absolutely, and I think this is a very important point, that as parents it's vital to do your own research, to understand what games your child is playing, what maybe some of the risks are, to understand what social media platforms they're accessing and what age limits those platforms are supposed to have. And I also think one thing I would like to add from the point of view of the parent is also be mindful of what you're posting about your child online. Do you really want pictures of your child in the bath being out on on these global internet platforms? Do you want to expose where your child goes to school or what their activities are? So I think as parents we also need to be a bit mindful about our own social media use. So I think in order to wrap up, we've had very rich discussions today that have covered a wide range of topics, but I just wanted to ask each of you, if someone is concerned about a child's safety, where can they get help? What can they do to help? Where can they report this? Maybe Ayesha, to start with you.
Okay, to start with me from the school or the education context. At a school level, the life skills teacher is there. We are currently also busy training our life skills teachers on responding to abuse in learners. But there's also the regional school counselor or your race coordinators where you can get help. Schools are supposed to have a school health committee, school health and safety committee, which also has a referral list. So if something is detected, they will know the social worker whom to call, the police officer whom to bring in. We're trying to train them on the procedures to ensure that the child will receive the justice that they need. So obviously this is still an ongoing process, but we are really working hard to strengthen the structures at a ground level in order for children to be able to say that they're being abused, and for the process to be there and the referral network to be there.
Thank you. Markus, would you like to add?
Yeah, in terms of reporting abuse, be it suspected abuse or actual abuse, there are also other platforms that parents and the entire community can use. And these include, for instance, calling the helpline at Lifeline Childline, which is 106 or 116, to report any suspected cases of abuse, or simply to just call to get more information about any sort of safety issues. Abuse can also be reported at any gender-based violence protection unit or at any police station within the jurisdiction where the abuse takes place. And as far as the distribution and the possession of child sexual abuse material is concerned, if a person comes across images of a sexual nature involving children online, they can also report that on the website of Lifeline Childline. There is a reporting portal that is actually aimed at removing content of a sexual nature that is involving children.
Thank you. And Foibe, would you anything like to add?
Yeah, so children can also talk to a trusted adult, and in the community we also have a Women and Men Network Against Crime. So these are people that also deal with issues of abuse in the community. So these are people that are known in the community and they are easily accessible. So in the police station also that are in the area, where also parents and their children can go and report these cases.
Thank you very much. And I'd just like to add that with the new Child Care and Protection Act, anybody who has interactions, works with children, whether as a teacher, a community worker, so on, has a responsibility to report known or suspected abuse to a social worker or to a police officer. And one thing that I would like to just stress is that misreporting of abuse is extremely rare. Globally, I think it's about 0.2% of all abuse reports have been found to be untruthful or mistruths. So the main message I would like to stress is if you hear a child, if a child tells you something, if you see red flags, do report it, and it's very unlikely that a child will mistell that they have been abused. And it's something that requires more investigation. So just before we wrap up, Ayesha, Markus, Foibe, would you have any final remarks you'd like to say?
Well, I obviously would like to say thank you very much for having me here today. It's always very interesting to talk about these issues that are so close to our hearts. I think my key message that I really want to stress is that we have to create a culture of care in our community and in our society. If the teachers care for the learners, they'll be able to see that there are problems. If parents are caring, they'll be able to see that there are problems. If the community is caring, they'll be able to see there are problems in that household. They'll be able to identify the issues. So we really just need to come together and just really care about our neighbors, about our friends, and about our children.
Thank you. Markus?
From my end, I'll also say thank you very much for having me here today and speaking about quite an important topic that is affecting children and our societies in general. My concluding remarks are that we need to create a culture of open relationship. And that when a report is made to you, if a child tells you that I was abused, it's not for you to play the judge. It's not for you to investigate. It's not for you to determine whether this was true or not. But it's for you to support the child. It's for you to take this further, to report it to someone who can actually provide support to this child and really rescue the child. So let's not discourage our children from reporting to us by closing that communication line, and let's not discourage them from opening up to us by judging them or giving them these impressions that we are not going to take this up or we're not going to believe what you're going to tell us. So I think that's
Very
what
good
I would
point.
want.
Thank you. And Foibe, final remarks.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. I think my final remark would be that parents need to have that open communication with their children. So parents, let's get involved in the life of our children. So let's put away the phone. So let's have that open communication at home at night when you come from work. Ask your child, how was your day?
Yes.
So have that relationship with your child, and it takes a village to raise a child. I don't like to see children misbehaving in the community, and sometimes adults we just look at it and say, that is Markus' child. So the child is spoiled. So, but we really need to correct them in a good manner that would have a better society for tomorrow.
Thank you very much. And our children's childhoods are short, so let's make the most of them, enjoy that quality time with them, and really nurture these young people. So Ms. Ayesha Wentworth, Ms. Foibe Silvanus, and Mr. Markus Angula, thank you so much for joining us today to reflect on the importance of child safety and responsive care. And thank you, viewer, for joining us. I hope this has been, this information has been valuable and has provided insight into the importance of early childhood development in Namibia, the importance of protecting children and practicing responsive caregiving, and how the Right Start campaign aims to assist the government in its efforts to provide our children with the best early childhood development services. To learn more about how you can make a child's first steps the right steps, visit our website at www.rightstart.com.na, and you can also find us on social media on all the handles displayed on the screen. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.